Hello, everyone. I'm Lily Geisendorfer. I'm director at Jerwood Arts, and I'm very pleased to be introducing this online event to accompany the launch of our new exhibition, Jerwood Solo Presentations 2021. It's opening today at Jerwood Space in London. We've invited the artists Emii Alrai, Freya Dooley, and Bryony Gillard, and curator Harriet Cooper, our head of visual arts, to preview and introduce the new commissions in their own words. For those of you who aren't familiar with Jerwood Arts, we are the leading independent funder dedicated to supporting UK artists, curators, and producers to develop and thrive. We enable transformative opportunities for individuals across art forms, supporting imaginative awards, bursaries, fellowships, projects, programs, and commissions. And we present new work and bring people from across the arts together through our exhibitions and events in London, as well as across the UK in partnerships with leading museums and galleries, and in the last 12 months online. So what is Jerwood Solo Presentations? Now in its 5th year, Jerwood Solo Presentations creates a platform for the most outstanding early career artists from across the UK to have their first major solo presentation in London. It provides a fully resourced opportunity for artists to develop a significant new commission on their own terms and creates a unique space for conversation and experimentation across and between disciplines. Diverse in content and materials, the works span sculpture, installation, moving image, and sound, with each artist taking over a whole gallery to present their ideas. This exhibition brings together 3 distinct voices, convening individual dialogues on loss and illness, facade and post-colonial museum practices, and the experience of distance and intimacy in domestic space. Jerwood Solo Presentations 2021 was selected and curated by Harriet Cooper, Head of Visual Arts at Jerwood Arts. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Harriet and our 3 artists for this very special preview event. First up, Emii Alrai, who is presenting her work in our Gallery 1. She uses sculpture and installation to interrogate ideas of inherited nostalgia, geographical identity, and post-colonial museum practices of collecting and display. Rooted in her Iraqi heritage, her work draws on museum collections, ancient writing from the Middle East, and oral histories to navigate an understanding of displacement and cultural collision. Emii was born in Blackpool and is based in Leeds. She graduated from the University of Leeds with an MA in Art Gallery and Museum Studies in 2018. She recently completed the Triangle Asteroides residency in Marseille, France. In 2020, she received the Paul Hamlyn Foundation Artist Award and was part of the Yorkshire Sculpture International Sculpture Network. She was selected for the Arab British Centre Making Marks project in Kuwait in 2019 and the Tetley Artist Associate Programme in 2018. Freya Dooley works across media, encompassing writing, moving image, performance, and sound in her practice. Her work builds layered and unstable narratives, collaborative fictions which navigate their way through divergent subjects, expanding outwards from close-range environments and observations. Freya lives and works in Cardiff. She graduated with a BA in Fine Art from Cardiff School of Art and Design in 2011 and was a member of Syllabus 3, a UK-based peer-led alternative learning programme from 2017 to 18. Dooley currently holds a 2-year fellowship at G39 Cardiff, which is supported by the Freelance Artist Programme. In 2020, she undertook a residency with Beppu Project in Japan, supported by Wales Arts International. Bryony Gillard works across writing, workshops, performance, video, and exhibition making to reflect upon events, creatures, and ideas that refuse to be categorized. In her work, she creates a space for genealogies of intersectional feminist practice that are elusive, messy, and thoroughly entangled in contemporary concerns. Bryony is an artist, curator, and educator, and she's based in Bristol. She graduated with an MFA from the Dutch Art Institute School for Art Praxis in 2015. Her work was included in the Tate touring exhibition Virginia Woolf, an exhibition inspired by her writings, in 2018, and she was awarded the 2019 Royal Albert Memorial Museum Artist Commission to create unctuous, Between Fingers, which has also been shown at the Holden Gallery in Manchester, Cinema Maison, BB15 Linz, TBA 21 Academy in Venice, and at Arnolfini in Bristol. And last but not least, Harriet Cooper is a curator from Manchester, currently based in London. She's head of visual arts here at Jerwood Arts, where she's responsible for developing and leading the visual arts work, including our projects, partnerships, funding, research, and awards. She curates our gallery programme in London and on tour around the UK, and recently developed the exhibition Jerwood Collaborate, which showcased new commissions by collaborative and collective artistic practices, including by Turner Knight Prize nominees Array. Prior to this, Harriet held roles at First Sight in Colchester, the British Council, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, Tate Liverpool, and the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester. She was co-curator of Philippa Barlow's commission Folly for the British Pavilion at the 57th Venice Biennial in 2017, and developed the major commission Not Yet at Ease with Rags Media Collective for 1418 Now in 2018. She's an independent member of the Wales in Venice Advisory Committee 2020 to 2024. Thank you so much for joining us for this special preview event, and I very much hope to see you in the galleries at Jerwood Space soon to enjoy the works in person. They are wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you for that introduction, and yeah, thank you everyone for being here. It is so exciting to be bringing you this kind of preview event for Jerwood Solo Presentations, and to actually have the works in the gallery ready to share with everyone today. It feels like it's been a long time coming. So I guess I first got to know Emii, Bryony and Freya back sort of through 2019, and we first started talking about these commissions back then as well. So it's been quite a while, quite a lot's happened since the initial seeds were sort of sown. And it's really exciting in that sense to see how those ideas have evolved and changed and developed and become more ambitious in the way that they inhabit the galleries today. So I'm sure that when many of you visit, you'll get a sense of how that time has allowed for new ideas and research to flourish, which is really brilliant. We're going to start by introducing the works used. So there's 3 individual commissions with Emii, Bryony and Freya. And each of the works are very different and in line with the artist's own practice. And we're going to begin by introducing those to you so you can begin to get a sense of them before talking a little further about the works and then talking further about what it's meant to go through this process and show those works in the gallery. So I'm going to start by asking Emii if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about your commission in Gallery 1.
Yes, thank you so much. My name's Emii. I'm an artist based in Leeds, and my main mediums are mainly sculpture and installation. And for the Jerwood commission, I have made a new sculptural installation called Passing of the Lilies. That has kind of built on themes in which I've kind of explored in my previous practice, which have been ways in which sculptural objects essentially act as museum artifacts, and how they're kind of presented on armatures that mimic the ways in which Western museums have presented objects that are not from the West, specifically looking at objects from the Middle East. Passing of the Lilies is a kind of development in the work that I've kind of made before, which has been very object-based, and normally I kind of work with materials such as polystyrene, which I've worked with for this commission as well, but to kind of recreate like larger scale objects that have been developed from museological objects that exist within museums. And this commission has kind of focused more on architectural objects that have sort of been, I guess, severed or amputated from their geographies and their landscapes, and then put into museums such as like the V&A, such as the British Museum, and how these kind of, I guess, facades of architecture are then like put into a kind of hierarchy system without very much information at times, and how we kind of navigate through them. So through the work that I made for the Jerwood Commission, I kind of wanted to play with this idea of how we kind of navigate objects through movement and how we kind of can weave between these like large scale sculptural objects that are made to look like stone or made to look like objects that might come from like these imagined geographies of how we perceive like the Middle East. Also thinking quite a lot about tomb spaces and burials in relation to objects that are musealized and how those are excavated and then I guess reinterred into the museological space through vitrines and through armature as well. And with this commission is the first time that I've kind of worked with real flowers, which is quite nice and also like very strange because normally my work's very like brittle and very dry in a sense because of the materials that I kind of use. So I guess trying to play with this idea of renewals and also burials and the passing of time and how that kind of will develop throughout the course of the exhibition as well, alongside these objects that are kind of forged and patinated to look like they are these very valuable objects that might be found in archaeological digs. So yeah, that's kind of what I've presented for Jerwood Solo Presentations.
That's such a good introduction and an introduction to our challenges of learning how to look after the lilies as well, which I think is something our team are really excited about. I think it's really interesting. I first got to know you and your work around the time that you were working towards the show at Vitrine and the show at the Tetley, and thinking about those spaces are really different types of spaces as well. I know when we were talking about the commission for Gallery 1 at Jerwood Space, it's a really different space. It's quite a busy space. It's used as a thoroughfare and people walk and spend time there. And I guess, yeah, I was interested in how much that has challenged the way that you think about making for that space, or where there's been exciting opportunities in that.
I think at first, because I remember when we'd kind of had initial conversations around like which spaces we would each be using. And I think that because I guess working with Vitrine and having the Vitrine space was already quite like a challenging space in a sense, and I'd kind of always been quite interested in these spaces that you kind of have to, how do you kind of I guess like enrobe them or like transform them into something that becomes its own narrative. And I was really interested in Gallery 1 as well as being really frightened of it, because I was like, normally like my like gut reaction is to be like, okay, I'm going to cover the walls in like cardboard and like, you know, really change the space from like the walls. But in that space, it just seemed like a bit of a wasted opportunity to kind of do something that I'd already been making and have kind of reused in the past shows that I've done. And I really wanted to kind of play with this idea of passage as well, and like how that space is used and how to develop the kind of sculptural works to become parts of entry or like parts of exit or these kind of thoroughfares in a sense, and what that sense of procession might be. So I think that really, I think also just thinking about like access routes as well, like how big objects would have to be in that space, how spaced apart they would have to be, and actually that maybe less objects, because I'm a natural hoarder, and I think with the past exhibitions that I've done, it's been like objects, 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 objects. And I feel like I really wanted to kind of strip that back a bit and focus more on scale and thinking more about different ways in which armature can kind of be used as, I guess, like as a technique of guiding people through or like directing you into specific areas and how you look at things and how you interact with things through your own bodily like movements. So I think that using that space really like pushed me to kind of think about different ways in not just cladding walls and not just filling it completely with objects, and kind of thinking more about spaciousness.
I think even with the short time since you installed to opening today, being able to see the way that people are navigating in the space, it's really interesting. And I know that's something you'll see as you're kind of, when you're around with the show open. And, you know, I guess there's four entrances in that space, but the way that people choose to walk through the arch and kind of be enclosed by that, or walk around the edges and go through different routes. It's really interesting how, yeah, how sculpture and the mass of it kind of has enabled that to happen. I think it's, yeah, we're excited to kind of keep watching that and be looking at how everyone uses it. Thanks, Emii. Freya, I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about your commission next, which is in Gallery 2.
So the work's called Temporary Commons, and it's a multi-channel sound and print installation. The audio work contains a series of scenes in which the protagonist narrates their experience within the kind of precarious structures of a rented terraced house, which is subject to a variety of kind of uncontrollable leaks and infiltrations. So things like water is gradually seeping into the house, and there's also these kind of audible leaks of the overheard lives of the neighbours next door, who the narrator kind of has this ambivalent kind of voyeuristic relationship with. So the narrative is rooted in how these kind of minute individual experiences of living are connected, either knowingly or unknowingly, by the structures that they share or the protagonist shares with the neighbours. So things like the plumbing system, and also there's this kind of sinister character of the landlord who kind of is sort of acts as his own kind of he's like a form of drainage also. So the soundtrack to the work was developed in collaboration with the musician and artist Emma Thomas, and that's like a really key component to the work. So I don't really have a succinct way to describe it yet, but I suppose it operates somewhere in between a kind of monologue, musical, and radio play.
I was told that in Italian, to hear means also to feel, and in Greek, to listen means also to obey. They say you should listen to your gut, but mine is unreliable. The house is digesting. Water is filling up from under the floor. I wade through dirty puddles to reach the microwave. Every night's dinner date. Something easy, something salty, ideally something to make me feel European. Lasagna, cannelloni, macaroni cheese. I watch the meal turning in a container that will likely outlive me and remember me once on an aeroplane. I'm in the middle seat, the worst one, nestled between strangers, watching a mediocre film about losing your senses in every sense, with each loss preceded by intense, panicked indulgence. Here is me, absent-minded, wet pasta and a plastic fork, facing opposite Ewan McGregor or someone like him. I'm drunk on tiny bottles and he's consumed too, glugging down olive oil until it spills from his mouth. I chew on stale bread roll while Ewan batters on raw meat and rotten eggs, sugar, salt and lemons like a dog in a reckless splurge, in the moments before taste disappears forever.
It's quite an incredible experience to be within it and how it holds you in it. Because I think one of the things I know that we've talked about is that scale that is present in the way that it is as an installation, but also in the detail of it. There's this real kind of mix between, in the narrative, perhaps what feels very personal and small scale to wider geological impact or kind of, I guess, the way that we kind of exist together as a society. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how scales operated differently in the piece.
So in a lot of my work, I'm really interested in these kind of parallels between the body and the kind of landscape or environment that it exists within, and these kind of slippages between inside and outside. So the house, in a lot of ways, acts as a kind of conduit for that. And then there's these kind of small domestic scenes which act as kind of symbols of wider themes or catalysts to kind of wider problems that happen kind of within the narrative or are kind of associated to the narrative. So in terms of scale, there are these kind of minute domestic things that happen, like the dripping of water, and the protagonist has this kind of constant anxiety of fear around the leaks compromising the ground that the house sits on. So worrying that it will at some point be swallowed by a sinkhole, which are these kind of insecure formations that form slowly and imperceptibly underfoot. I guess with this piece, there's this kind of characterization that happens, like not just with the human narrator and the neighbors and the plumber and the landlord, but also with the house itself. So I was thinking about how to describe through the sound how the house can be this living, breathing object, which holds all these associations of care and protection, but then also like living in this kind of corrupt landscape of renting, these kind of and shifting ideas of responsibility and maintenance and a feeling of being like unrooted or uncertain or temporary. So there's lots of kind of contradictory states in the work, like all these things that compromise the containment of the space, and also these kind of fleeting moments of connection that happen through that as well.
There's kind of that, I guess, the idea of neglect of those structures that care for you. I think the narrative and the way it is composed into the soundscape is so just fascinating, and it really draws you in. And I know certainly for myself, like it made me think a lot more about what's happening behind these walls and like all the pipes and the things that are happening around that you sort of take for granted and have these kind of moments in your life, but aren't necessarily things that you put as a character center stage. So that kind of way that it becomes such a huge part of what that narrative is, I think is really clever.
I think also in terms of the installation, it being and your question about scale, like the multi-channel surround sound environment that I wanted to create kind of elevates a lot of those small things or hopefully kind of turns them into something else. I think with sound and things that are overheard, things become other things and in any case, but these like kind of ideas of like circulation and drainage and control kind of are escalated with like a kind of with the soundscape, I suppose, is the intention anyway.
Definitely. I think everybody who visits will feel that for sure. Bryony, it would be amazing to hear you tell us a little bit about your commission, which is in the third gallery at Jerwood Space.
Yeah, sure. So it's a moving image work called I Dreamed I Called You on the Telephone. And broadly it considers ideas around loss and time under late capitalism. It uses a lot of different kind of registers of speech and image to explore the lack of control that we maybe have over the forces that enact on our bodies. So both on a kind of individual level in terms of kind of illness and sickness and death and dying, but also on a collective basis. So thinking about kind of more the structural forces that we enact against all the time. It draws on first person accounts alongside poetry and prose and my own lived experiences to explore experiences of sickness, grief, death and dying, and how these states of being can contradict and work against capitalist time and kind of occupy a different sort of temporality. All of the contributions are brought together by different protagonists. So these include my sister, who's an NHS midwife, a red fox, a countertenor singer, a sewage works, and also the voices of some of my closest friends.
Leave your armpit hair at the Superfund site you once lived near. Your nose hairs for any human resources officer who denies you leave. When your eyelashes fall out, send them as a reverse wish to every person who has at your illness disappeared. Your hair will fall out onto every surface you come near. It will fall into new alphabets and new words. Read these words to discover the ethology of your illness. If you are lucky, you will read another word that means illness has turned you into an armament. In the bald spots, you will read how to weaponize your dying cells against what you hate and what hates you. As you see a weapon in your falling hair, also you will see your body as it falls is a weapon, also as it doesn't fall. In this new theory of being a sick person, your friend will say that caring for you is now to care for arms. You have turned yourself into an armoury. Everyone who brings you food or water is also now loading a gun.
BT.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about with the commission as well is the way that it's come together and the way maybe that voice and collaboration has been used really differently in this work compared to the way that you've made moving image work previously. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, because I think it works so well, and there's this real sense of the power of every contribution, and every protagonist in there is in there for they do something so specific and so important within the work, that kind of space. And yeah, I'd love to hear you talk more about it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the way that I normally would work it is kind of quite a workshop focused model. So what I like to do is bring together a group of people to have conversations, undertake exercises, generate content, and just come together and generate something collectively. But for many reasons, that wasn't possible with this work. And also I was quite keen to try out developing different types of relationships with the people that I work with. And because of the themes that I wanted to explore, and because it was so much about things that have happened to me, but also things that have happened to people that are close to me, it actually felt really right to have these kind of one-on-one conversations. And although, it's been a very different way of working, and a lot of it has been mediated by this little box, like through the internet, something about that actually really lent itself to the work in terms of, so some of the recordings in the film are voice notes that friends sent me in answer to like a kind of a long conversation that we had about their experiences of losing loved ones. And I think actually being able to send me a voice note lent a little bit of distance and enabled them to kind of keep control of that narrative, but also feel comfortable with passing that information on to me. And so I think it worked really well in terms of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sense of that intimacy comes across. There isn't that sense of staging. I think all of the contributions feel very reflective and very poignant in the way that they're able to talk about what doesn't get talked about a lot, to be honest. I think we're not great at talking about illness and grief and death and our experiences of it, because they're so individual and so close. So I think in that sense, it's going to speak to a lot of people in different ways, and there'll be things that feel familiar, or things that don't, because there's some really very generous contributions in there. also, I think, yeah, there's incredible sort of baritone voice. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, because it's a really haunting and beautiful solo sound.
Yeah, so I think technically Nick prefers to their voice as countertenor, but then that's, you know, there's lots of stuff to unpack around that in terms of kind of classical registers of music. My collaborator Nick Rawlings is an artist and a sound artist and vocalist and just an incredible human. And they're someone who I was curious about their practice for a long time, and we sort of knew each other as friends. And as in, this happens quite a lot when I'm making a work, I just had a really, really strong gut feeling that I wanted to work with them. And it just so happened that they had been returning to singing after an extremely long time away from it. So they're someone who sung a lot when they were young, but for various reasons, they left it behind. But as an adult, they've been coming back to this this practice of singing. So our collaboration kind of started with a series of conversations about things that had happened to us in our lives, and very kind of really quite organically, I invited Nick to provide some recordings for me, and I knew that they were really interested in Baroque music, and it's an area that I know nothing about, but I find really, really fascinating. And we had some really interesting conversations about the drama and the sorrow that kind of exists within this genre, and obviously the themes that I'm looking at are so big and so universal, and full of such sorrow and loneliness, that the recordings that Nick sent me just felt so kind of perfect for the film. And normally when one would get this kind of like a cappella recording, you probably put a little bit of reverb on it in the sound mix, but when Nick sent me the recordings, they were just completely vulnerable, just their voice, just this raw singular voice. And I decided in the process of editing that it really, really had to stay in terms of that, like that real raw kind of naturalness of the voice. But yeah, so that's how it came about.
That really comes across, and you can tell my musical knowledge is not good as well, so sorry about that. Not knowing my singing. I think I will have to ask, because I know a lot of people might ask, but I wondered if you could just quickly say anything about your protagonist, the fox. Just the footage of him is so, yeah, incredible. Yeah, I'm sure people will be curious to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Foxy's a friend of mine. We became familiar with each other about 2 years ago. I live in a very urban, kind of dense part of the city of Bristol, but there's some kind of small gardens behind where I live. And one of my neighbours decided to start feeding Foxy. So he became very tame. And the period of time where he started coming into our garden on a kind of a daily basis, sometimes twice a day, I was also home a lot because I was really unwell. So my visits with Foxy, because I didn't have any pets at the time, became a really, really important part of my day, and could massively and dramatically change my mood, let's say, having this interaction with him. And I just became really, really fascinated and curious about his relationship to the city and his relationship to the community that I live in. And I started doing lots of research about foxes and just became fascinated in terms of their adaptability. So they're one of the only like species of organisms that do really, really well in urban environments. So they've massively adapted to fit in with the structures and the environments that we've created, which I just think is really, really fascinating. And they're one of the only mammals that's kind of on pretty much every continent. And they're hugely prolific animals. But yeah, in terms of my relationship with Foxy, he is just a very interesting and curious creature. And I discovered that He was very tame. Obviously, I made sure I really was keeping boundaries with him. We didn't feed him because I thought it was really important that he didn't get so comfortable with us that then he'd get too close to someone else and get himself hurt. But for whatever reasons, he just has absolutely no fear of people, like a lot of urban foxes. So I just started to introduce different objects to him over a period of time and film him as a kind of just as a study to see what would happen. And yeah, slowly this collaboration developed between us, which is just, yeah, really magical and really interesting and really unpredictable. Obviously as well, because he's a wild animal, and it felt really important at all times to kind of keep remembering that, because he was really unpredictable and could do anything at any point, even though he found himself in this very domestic environment.
There's a real contrast, I guess, between the dog, which your sister, the midwife, is stroking for comfort, and the way that he is. I think there's something so almost disturbing or uncanny about seeing him play with the sort of prosthetic limbs. And I know certainly, yeah, they always give me that sense of detachment, like what it's like to kind of watch something happening to your body that you're not in control of, or to see that kind of way that nature can play with things in a way that, yeah, you can't predict or contain.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for those introductions. I think that gives everyone a really great sense of where the ideas are in the work and yeah, how they've developed. So we thought maybe, as this is the preview event, and normally we would be standing in the gallery with a cold drink and probably, yeah, meeting lots of people, that it would be great to talk about how the works are actually in the gallery spaces and how you've chosen to use those. Because I think one of the things we really love about the Jerwood Solo Presentations project is it is this idea that you have a whole gallery and you can do what you want with that. If you chose in line with your work to put nothing in it, I would probably support that, as long as we'd had some really good discussions about it and it felt right. So yeah, I'm really excited as to how you've chosen to take over each of those spaces. And I'm going to start with Emii. We talked a little bit about it, but I think there's probably more to say.
Yeah, I feel like with mine, I think one of the main things that I think was really like pulled into consideration is how armature would kind of be used as a tool. And I think I kind of spoke about this earlier when I introduced the work, but I guess normally, or like in previous projects, I've kind of used the armature as something that is like floor based and then is elevated and then objects are kind of sat on top. But whereas in this space where Jerwood has this gorgeous floor that is listed, and it was this kind of discussion around how do we still use armature and kind of have it potentially like playing the same kind of roles in which it's inhabited in like previous work, where objects are kind of pierced or objects are kind of like tethered by these kind of very violent and very like kind of like horribly medieval looking contraptions and armatures, or like prosthetic as well. And I guess like what working within that space was kind of, I guess the biggest challenge of it was like modeling something that would actually be able to like hold the weight of the works and not actually use the floor at all. So it was really interesting to think about how the pillars could actually be used as like a structural part of the installation as well, and kind of like enrobe them into the installation too, rather than just kind of trying to work around those. And I guess I really like wanted to, in some senses, shrink the space a little bit with using the pillars as like points of like tension too, and how that kind of plays with this idea of how are these objects kind of held, and how does that kind of relate or like make us think about how objects in museums are also held as well. Like how are these like huge things of stone and these like architectural church facades or facades from mosques or facades from buildings held up like in these museum spaces by metal armatures or by plinths, but also how were these carried over, how were these like transported, and then what's kind of set like left in that space of residue, and what makes those objects worthy, if that is what we talk about when we talk about like the elevation of objects, to come from these different spaces and then kind of live their lives like pierced and like wounded essentially by these like forms of armature. So I guess like for the space, I kind of really wanted to I guess in some senses like replicate that and replicate the kind of scale of how big these objects are when in big museums, and how those are, is it like built into the architecture of those spaces a lot of the time too. And I guess using the pillars was a way of interweaving that they become almost one with the building itself. And then what does that really mean when we think about ownerships of these objects? So we think about like the Lamassu winged bulls that are in the British Museum, and the fact that they're literally like stuck into the wall and they form an archway, and they can no longer move out of that because they become part of that architecture. And then what does that mean about, I guess, like the provenance of that object, or that history of that object, or its future? They almost become erased, or they become these dead objects. They become lifeless in a sense because they're so far removed from their like geographical I guess like location, or also their histories, or their heat, or their I guess like their physical kind of reminder of that, because we don't have those interpretations around them necessarily, or the oral histories maybe to kind of go around that too. So I guess within the space I really wanted to kind of play with that and push those ideas a bit. And it was definitely like very scary using the pillars and trying to get all my measurements right, because I'm not a very precise measurer. But yeah, I work with an amazing metal fabricator called Mark, and me and him kind of designed these very violent looking medieval kind of torture devices that are now holding up these sculptures. So it was really like a nice challenge, a frightening one too.
I think they work so well as well. Though it definitely, I know with all of us during the install, some moments of figuring that out. But actually, yeah, the way that they kind of trap the objects and hold the objects, and it'll enable them to take up the space they want to. I really liked, yeah, the way that you were sort of describing what that, when they become so much a fabric of the building as such, and are so bespokely kind of fitted or installed within a building, kind of what that takes away from the actual excavation and provenance and kind of everything about that object. And there's something maybe like even about that arch at Jerwood that is so bespokely fitted to that space and to those armatures that kind of hold it in place, that it does almost become part of that, and you can't imagine it necessarily somewhere else in the same way. It becomes something that feels very bespoke in that sense, rather than having its own provenance of where it's come from. But it leaves you that wondering, which I think is really interesting. Freya, what about you? You're going into Gallery 2 is a very big shift and quite a different experience from the kind of open Gallery 1. And yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about what you were thinking about with that room, because it's pretty atmospheric.
Yeah, I like atmosphere. I like to create a space where you feel like you're stepping in to somewhere else. Like, to me, that's the kind of that's my interest in gallery spaces. If I'm working within one space, then I want it to feel like some kind of event, I suppose. But yeah, also it's like such a luxury to have a whole room, or like to have this the space that this commission offers. So I really wanted to create a space for listening, and where the soundtrack was immersive and could become almost sculptural. That was a kind of key, the sound was kind of key element that I wanted to develop in relation to the architecture of the room. So I mixed it. I developed the work obviously in advance of install, but then I mixed it in the space in that sense. And then, yeah, so the work has this kind of multi-channel surround system. And then in terms of visuals, there's this large scale print that runs around the circumference of the room, which it comes up to a kind of domestic sort of dado rail height, which and it kind of references this sort of idea of rising damp, but actually the print itself is almost decorative, like it's this kind of moldy, marbled kind of effect that I was really interested in, the kind of the surface of that. And in terms of use, like how we kind of set up the space, that much of my work over the last year or two has centered on these kind of tangential narratives. And I was working a lot with like monologue and dialogue and narrative in that way. And I was really interested in how in using like in terms of the formal aspects of the work, like using the space to focus on voice and sound, and how the kind of spoken narrative voice interacts with music and sound design, and how sound can sort of shift and move your attention, and also create some sort of like visual space and possibilities of imagination in a different way. I do work with moving image as well, and I'd considered making it a film at one point, but I didn't want to root the work in specific imagery because I felt like the kind of textures and density of the sound lent itself to listening. And especially because so much of the work describes the kind of acoustic experiences in everyday life. So apart from the narrative voice, there's no real anchor point to the work. And I would also say that probably about the narrative itself as well. It's like quite a sort of unanchored experience. So yeah, and then the speaker, I don't know if this is too much detail, but the speakers are hung high because I really wanted the sound to feel almost circular, or like it was part of the room itself, rather than other exhibitions I've done where it's been a conscious decision to have the kind of sound at a sort of human scale.
Muscle, bone, fat, fluid, muscle, tissue, bone, gas, fat, air, fluid. All of these things next to each other. That's what we call the
And yeah, with this like luxury of the space that I mentioned, I'm really interested in creating an environment for being and listening, and also holding people within it. So there's this bespoke seating in the center of the room, which is kind of a sort of irregular circular shape, which references the kind of sinkhole formations, but its main function is to sort of create a center point of stillness amongst the kind of movement and energy of the sound. And also it was really important to me to caption the work and to think more generally, like not just with this commission, but more widely in my practice about who can experience the work and how, especially working with sound and film. And so I was really fortunate to be able to work with Collective Text and Kieran Stewart, who I worked with in consultation on creating these animated captions. So every other play of the work is captioned also. Yeah.
I think as well the captions are quite the way that they're done in line with the work, and they kind of feed into the way that the rhythm of the work and what you hear. I think they work really successfully. It's quite I think that thing of not having a focal point is really successful in the way that you've been thinking about that space as well, because as you say, the work it meanders and it kind of takes you into loads of different places as you kind of spend time with it. And it's quite unnerving in a weird way to come into a gallery and not have something which you walk towards, or to have multiple spaces to kind of move between. I think there's a stillness I find when you go into that space and you sit in that central place, and there's a continuous print that goes around, but there's nothing really that you should be staring at. So it does allow you to kind of separate and to listen, and it's quite cozy in there as well. So sometimes a lie down too, and yeah, just kind of really hold that space for it, which is really great. So onto Bryony. So one of the really great things about Gallery 3, I think that works well with your commission, is that you kind of walk down a corridor into that space. So it feels quite separate. It feels like you're entering a kind of separate space. And yeah, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit how you were thinking about presenting the work in there.
So the moving image work's presented as an installation. It's probably like the slowest and stillest film that I've made so far, and it felt really important that, similarly to Freya's installation, that there was a kind of a conscious shift as you stepped over the threshold into the space. So as Harriet says, you come down a long dark corridor and then you enter a space which is actually much lighter. So the carpet, the walls, the sound panels and the seating are all painted in the same kind of uniform, pale, kind of murky green, which is a colour taken directly from the colour palette of the film. And I felt it was really important because of the themes of the film, and kind of understanding that depending on who you are and what's going on in your life, it could be quite a difficult piece of work to watch, that it felt really important that the space kind of held you in some way. And there's something about this kind of uniform, paler colour, which does create a kind of a sort of calmer kind of a space that holds you. So the green kind of oscillates between mimicking the organic kind of matter in the scenes going on in the film, in terms of the garden that Foxy's filmed in, and also the kind of gungy, murky, mossy images of the sewage works. But at the same time, it also is reminiscent of a more medical space. So perhaps a waiting room, a doctor's surgery, a space in a hospital. And it has that kind of relationship to, I don't know, the spaces that are quite commonly painted green because of green's supposedly therapeutic and calming qualities. But the thing I find really interesting about that is that for anyone who has been kind of repeatedly in any of these kind of medical spaces, they quickly become places that can be quite anxiety inducing. So any amount of green doesn't really do an awful lot to help with that. But I felt that it was kind of an interesting colour to choose for the installation. And then alongside that, there's one long bench, which allows for social distancing, but also allows for people to sit together. It felt important to have one uniform piece of seating rather than individual seats, to kind of encourage some kind of collective experience with the work, just because parts of it are potentially quite lonely and isolating, and I think there's something quite interesting about people being encouraged to be together in watching it. But also the bench is upholstered and it has a back, which felt really important in terms of kind of creating a comfortable, soft place to rest whilst experiencing this film, which is around 15 minutes long. So it's quite a long time to sit in one position facing forward. And especially on the cycles of the film. So every three cycles, the film is captioned. So it kind of felt important that the seat had a back to make it as accessible as possible.
So as I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, we've all been in conversation about these commissions for quite a while now, back in 2019. And obviously there's been quite a long period. Originally this exhibition was due to be presented last summer. So it's been quite a shift to only be opening it this spring/summer, depending on how you feel about the good weather at the moment. And I wondered if you wanted to reflect a little bit on how your ideas have shifted over that time. Maybe, yeah, if there's anything kind of that you really thought you wanted to achieve or try with this commission, or how that's changed, or not, maybe. But Emii, do you want to say anything around that?
Yes, sure. I guess like for my work, because I think at the point where you invited me to come and do the show, I think I'd just kind of come out of this moment of like mad production, and I think I was like thinking about how to kind of manage making like some, I guess for me, just the most kind of ambitious kind of sculpture that I've made. And I was really like trying to figure out how to do that with like the other productions that I had going on at the same time. And I think that obviously with like the pandemic and having the show be postponed and more time kind of added to that run, and I guess, I mean, firstly, like Jerwood have been amazing in supporting us through that time, and it's been just amazing to have, yeah, just that support. And I guess, you know what I mean, like the hand holding through that, to be like, the show's still definitely going to happen, and that you guys really committed to wanting to put these shows in the flesh as well, because I know not all artists have had the same kind of opportunities since the pandemic hit, to have that kind of commitment to their exhibitions. That was firstly like incredible, and also just still that same commitment to wanting to make these developments of our practices, and to really like encourage us to do like the work that we wanted to do at the beginning, which I thought was like really encouraging and great. But yeah, I guess for like my work, it kind of gave me a bit more time to kind of think about the content, or maybe do a little bit more research into that. I guess the tomb space and this idea of burials, and I guess trying to think about how to kind of rationalize what kind of forms would go in there. But I think the pandemic, and also just had that kind of uncertainty kind of, because my time was quite pressed towards the end of last year, because I was going away to France to do a residency. It kind of landed where we kind of knew when dates were opening, to be like, okay, so now I've got to do the show like really fast and make this, and then leave it to rest for a while and not see it for a couple of months. So that was quite weird, but it was also like amazing still to kind of just get to go into the studio and be like, oh, I can make some sculptures, and like they're going to have life sometime after this, hopefully. And yeah, I don't know if I've answered that question at all.
You totally have, and with loads of kind words about the uncertainty I think we all went through together, of so many changing deadlines and dates and things. That's felt like a real journey. But yeah, I think it was a really, I imagine it's been a really unusual making process in terms of making it, and then coming back 2 months, well, not even 2 months further than that, 4 months later, it works again in the gallery, being sort of the first time of then going, ooh, let's put them up. Yeah, it's been a really unusual process.
Yeah, it was strange, but also kind of good as well. I think it was very weird because I had to do a period of isolation as well, and I guess not really seeing the works until they were in the gallery and being like, I don't remember making these. I mean, I do, but like also I was like, wow, yeah, forgot.
I mean, you styled it out, even if you didn't remember. Freya, what about you? How have your ideas developed over this time? Because yeah, it's been a long, odd period.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Emii was saying. Like, it has been, yeah, really supportive time, and like actually really nice to have extended that amount of time that we're in conversation and working together. And that I had also, the way that I had worked in terms of making exhibitions had been quite intense before, where I was making shows within like quite short time frames. And yeah, and I'd also just come back from a residency in Japan at the beginning of the pandemic. So that that ability to kind of have the space to step away, or these like fluctuating periods of intensity were you know, sometimes difficult, but actually I think when it comes to the final work, yeah, really benefited the way that I work, and I learned a lot about the way that I work. So yeah, so this additional time, it allowed me to explore different directions for the writing and other elements of the work. I'd had a couple of other smaller commissions in the meantime with Holden Gallery, and a sort of 24-hour broadcast that I'd done with Maiden Mirth. So I was really interested in sort of radio plays and broadcast in general, which was really useful to kind of think through some of these ideas around sound and narrative in that way in the meantime. And I feel like time became really embedded in the process of the work, and I think that's also probably evident in the narrative as well, and the kind of way that I was working became sort of quite nebulous in a way. This show feels like a sort of culmination of a lot of research and a lot of thought, but it also simultaneously feels like the beginning of something else. So that's a really nice position to be in, I think. It feels very different to any other project that I've done. And I think the most positive aspect of the time was the space it allowed for me to work more slowly and mindfully with my collaboration with Emma Damon-Thomas, who is an artist and is also in the band Eyelet. So I learned a lot from working with her. She's incredible, she's very talented. And this kind of conversational back and forth way of working that we developed over time was really sort of integral and really great to give some breathing space to. There's a kind of like intimacy or like intensity with the way that I work. I do collaborate quite often in my work, but there's a sort of closeness to that collaboration. And Emma was like, there's a lot of processes of like layers and revisions, and Emma was very involved right from the beginning, like even when I didn't know what the thing was, what it was going to be. So our kind of conversations have been really integral to how the work kind of manifested in the end. And yeah, I feel like collaborating in a meaningful way is more than just sort of getting the thing done. So with Emma coming from a sort of slightly different creative context, being a musician, it was really, it helped me feel like really refreshed and engaged, like even when all the stuff around the commission, like in my personal life, or obviously with the pandemic and everything, was feeling quite unmanageable. This felt like fun and a really lovely way to be working. So
that's so nice to hear that, particularly around that collaborative process, because I think you're so right to say that collaboration takes time and it takes trust, and kind of to be able to actually have fun with it and learn with it and kind of enjoy working with each other on it. I know that's been a really key part of that development. That collaboration was something you were really excited about, so a good silver lining of extended time there, and I think it really shows in the work as well. It's such an incredible piece, so amazing. Bryony, what about you? 2019, I remember us talking about how short a commission this was for the way that you normally work, that we said, it's 6 months working on it, get the show open, it's going to be great. But that was quite a short period for your normal methodology, and it's kind of extended back again in a way.
It has extended back again. So I guess from the outset, because of the initial kind of half-year time frame, I wanted to experiment with working in a slightly different way, which I mentioned before in terms of kind of like the way that I was collaborating with other people. So as I said before, I really, really, really love and thrive on making spaces to bring people together, but also there's a sort of there's an energy and a labor that's involved in holding those spaces and facilitating them, which can really, really take its toll. So with this work, I felt I was curious to make a work which was more maybe perhaps reliant on myself, but still having collaborations with people on this kind of one-on-one level, but in a more sort of manageable way, rather than bringing people together and feeling responsible for hospitality and making sure everybody's okay, and kind of and holding and facilitating. So from the outset, that was a different approach. I said before to you, it was about maybe being a little bit more light on my feet. I get very, very, very excited and obsessed with the research that I'm doing, and I can go down extremely long and wiggly rabbit holes in terms of where the work goes. And I felt like I wanted to be a little bit more responsive and gestural with this piece of work, and also draw more on things that I'd personally been experiencing. Something about the extended time has sort of, in a sense, managed to distill our commissions in some way, and I think that's what the extra amount of time did for me. It helped me to sort of carefully keep going to use so many weird metaphors, peeling away the layers of the onion to get to the thing that I really, really wanted to explore and look at, but is still a kind of strange and ambiguous object in some ways. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of what happened, but also at the same time, because of things that were happening to me in terms of my own health, but also the health of a loved one, there were, and also the kind of the global grief that was happening in terms of the pandemic and just the awful times that were happening. There were periods of time that, and I'm sure this is the same for all of us, that I had to just put it down. So it was certainly like a real period of like stopping and starting, which was kind of completely necessary, and you know, in another situation wouldn't have been possible. But I'm really, really thankful I was able to do that for my own mental health, just because at certain points it was too brutal to be researching the philosophy of illness whilst caring for someone who was dying of cancer. It was just too many worlds colliding at the same time. So being able to kind of put it down and pick it back up was really necessary and useful. And I think also maybe also contributed to this kind of this slow process of unpicking and unlayering and getting to the thing that I really, really wanted to explore and look at.
I think it really shows in the work. And yeah, I would say that Lily said that to me after the first time that she watched the film as well. She said that everything that's in there is in there for the right reason and for the right amount, and it feels right in that sense. Yeah, I think it's definitely, there's something really important about that, being able to put stuff down and reflect. And it's something, this is the Jerwood Solo Presentations has always been quite a quick commission. It's quite focused and it's 6 months, and it's it's about that kind of next piece of work. And maybe there's something within that that it's definitely making me think a lot more about what that takes for an artist and that space that it needs to produce something like that for a gallery that is big and it is kind of pivotal and it's important and it pushes your practice. So there's been loads of really important reflections I've found personally on that and professionally. But I think as well, something that Freya touched on as well is that feeling of it being a step to something else. And that's something I'm really always excited on with these commissions, is that the commissions are so amazing. So that is exciting in itself, but also they point to kind of next things, like where are these going to take you? Where are those ideas going to go next? And who will see these and really want to support your next steps? And I think that's a really exciting moment to be in, to kind of be in this moment of being able to celebrate these and then look forward at all the brilliant things you three are going to do next. As part of the programme with Jerwood Solo Presentations, we get to work with you each to develop an event, and it's one of the really parts of the programme that is really enjoyable. And my colleague Miran works particularly on that, and I think we're always really excited about how the public programme around the exhibition can both extend critical dialogues and find new ways to see the work, but also offer opportunities to artists in the programme to do something different, or to meet different people, or to have conversations in a different space or about different elements of their practice. So we have got online and in-person events as part of this programme. And yeah, I wondered if you could each say a little bit about what you've developed with Miran for the programme, as I'm sure lots of people watching will be interested in how they might be able to experience the exhibition in different ways. So I'm going to start with Emii.
The event that I am doing is a collaboration between myself and Suleiman Majali, who is an artist based in Glasgow. And we're kind of working with Miran to produce what will be an operatic performance within the space of Passing of the Lilies. And it's kind of like a beginning of a collaboration that we're hoping to develop into a larger scale project that's kind of developed over like a year of having conversations through Instagram, through realizing that between our practices there's quite a lot of tessellations and areas of which there are kind of these points of similar kind of points of interest in our research topics, such as like ruptures and collisions and tomb space specifically. So I think I invited Suleiman to work with me like on this project to kind of develop an operatic performance where we will hopefully have a performer like in space, and really kind of using it as a kind of testing ground to see how we work collaboratively, how I guess how also like sculpture can kind of be activated in a sense by performance, like what that means, how these kind of themes of lament and the origins of opera also can kind of be explored, and what that kind of does in that space. So the event will be called Prologue, and it is on the 16th of July. So on the 16th of July. Let me just double check.
I believe so, yeah, the day before the last day of the exhibition.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Is it the first time that you've had performance within your sculptural work before?
Yes, so the only time that I really had any kind of sound piece in like sculptural work was my degree showpiece, and I haven't really revisited anything like that since, so I'm really excited, and yeah, like kind of really open to how this kind of unveils through this kind of process of collaboration, and how I think both me and Suleiman work together to develop like a narrative, and I guess these kind of fragments of poetry, how they kind of then interweave within like the sculptural space itself as well. So yeah.
It's going to be really exciting, yeah, to experience that, and to see how what that does to the installation, and how those things work in harmony. Freya, do you want to tell us a little bit about the event that you're going to be doing?
So the event that that I've been developing with Mirren will be a conversational broadcast with the artist, curator and producer Helen Froese. So Helen often works collaboratively and across disciplines, and we have a shared interest in ecologies and the social and political dimension of sound and listening. So the conversation will focus around sound practices, I think. And yeah, this is a kind of new conversation to me. I didn't know Helen before, so we're still developing what format that might take. But that's happening as an online event, and that's happening on the 30th of June.
It's going to be fascinating. I'm really excited to hear the two of you kind of unpack that, that sound element, that audio element within your work, which is something that's been developing really strongly over the last few years. So yeah, it's really exciting. Bryony, do you want to tell us a bit about what the conversation you've been developing as well?
Yeah, so on the 18th of June, I'm going to be having a conversation live and in person, but also I think potentially streamed, recorded, with Irene Aristizabal, who's head of curatorial and public practice at Baltic, and she's also the co-curator of the British Art Show 9. And I'm really excited to talk to her, particularly given the themes of British Art Show 9 around healing, care and tactics of togetherness, and how this overlaps with some of the things that I wanted to explore in the commission.
I think there's going to be some really nice overlaps there. I always think Irene's research around that is really fascinating. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting to see how that conversation and those kind of shared areas of interest develop. It has been so brilliant to work together, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work together as well. I can't imagine the last almost 14, 18 months without you guys. So it's been really incredible. And thank you to everybody who's joined us for this conversation, which is getting a bit soppy at the end. But I really hope that having heard even more from the artists and having this real insight into the works will encourage you to come and experience them in the gallery, because as we've sort of touched on, there was a real reason we waited to do this in the gallery and really wanted to have the works in the gallery so they can be experienced in person. And I think, yeah, anyone who comes to the exhibition will understand why. So please do come. There's no need to book. We're open Wednesday to Saturday, 12 till 7 p.m. And you can find out more about the events programme, which we've talked a little bit about online. And you do need to book tickets for some of those, actually I think for all of those, but they are free. So it's just Eventbrite sign up. We've got a little bit of a limited capacity for some of the in-person ones, as you might expect. So I would get in there quickly personally, because I think they'll be popular. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Emii, Bryony and Freya. And I think we will say goodbye, and hopefully we'll see you very soon actually in the gallery.